hope you all enjoyed part 1 about our adventures in Oxford House. Today, I will finish with part 2. Roxanne, the eldest daughter in grade 3 at the time, mentioned a couple of things that I had totally forgotten. First, she reminded me that at Christmas time, we, Kathy and I, had trouble getting the presents we wanted by mail. And Kathy cut out pictures of what Santa would bring them when we got back to Edmonton. Then she stuck the pictures in envelopes and put them under the tree on Christmas morning. There was no lack of Christmas trees at Oxford House. It was a very festive time of the year, and we really celebrated. But the actual opening of gifts was postponed for 6 months. In 1972, we had 2 gift openings, one in December and one in July. Roxanne also remembered an airline giving us several boxes filled with baby chicks to keep for a customer. We had them in the basement for a couple of days, and when they were picked up, each of the girls were given 2 chicks to raise. The second half of the year was more bingos to raise money for our big trip of 30 grade 7 and 8 students plus Kathy and me. Remember, most of these kids had not been outside of Oxford House, so we spent a lot of time preparing them for what they would see and experience in Winnipeg. The day finally came when Riverton's DC-3 arrived to take us to Winnipeg. It is probably the largest plane to ever land in Oxford House, and everyone was there to see us off. In Winnipeg, we stayed on the 3rd floor of a center where older members of a religious organization that served in northern Manitoba lived in retirement. They gave us 2 large rooms with bunk beds and a washroom. Kathy took the girls and I looked after the boys. They were naturally overexcited and wanted to touch and try out everything. We were naturally very anxious about their safety and ended up sleeping in single beds across the only door to the rooms. Me in the boys' room and Kathy with the girls. Luckily, we were on the 3rd floor and they did not try to get out the windows. When we got there, it was dinner time, so we lined up in the cafeteria. They could eat and drink as much as they wanted, and we cleaned them out of everything that first night, including all the bread, drinks, and desserts. Somehow, I had gotten a small TV with a 6-inch screen that could pick up local stations. You can just picture me and 15 boys gathered as close as possible to a tiny TV every chance we got. I had to set up a schedule for each day, and with Kathy's help, keep everybody on track. It took 1 day to get there and 2 days to get back to Oxford House. So that left us with 9 days in Winnipeg with 18 different activities. We would get up about 7:30 a.m. and get ready for breakfast around 8 a.m. After breakfast, we would gather and talk about what we would be doing that day, and then leave with a packed lunch at 9 a.m. for the morning activity. Lunch would be from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m., and then we were off on a new adventure. When we returned to the center each day, about 4 p.m., we would spend an hour writing in our diary about everything we had done that day, and then relax until dinner at 6 p.m. The evenings were spent around the center playing ball, watching the TV, playing cards and board games, reading, talking, and enjoying visiting with older brothers and sisters who were attending grade 9 to 12 classes in Winnipeg. The first day, we set off with me leading and Kathy bringing up the rear. It would take one day for us to keep constantly in a group, especially for crossing streets. Remember, most had never seen traffic lights, crosswalks, cars, or even buildings that were more than 1 story tall. They had little idea about traffic regulations. The first morning, we lost a small group who had spotted a Coca-Cola machine and had taken out 2 or 3 bottles each. I had to explain. There were at least 1,000 of these machines in Winnipeg, and you could always get a cold Coke any time, night or day. We spent that first morning just walking around, looking in windows, at cars, tall buildings, and people. Of course, those other people did their share of staring at us. Our fears of losing a student were legitimate, and despite our efforts, we lost one of the more mature girls the very first night. The police were able to find her the next day, and we sent her back by plane to Oxford House. After that, there were no more problems. We were on the 2nd floor of the Hudson Bay store when there was some loud screams from a group of our students who had found some snakes in the pet department. Most religions at that time depicted hell as containing the devil, fire, and snakes. Seen from their point of view, I would also scream and yell if I saw a slithering snake hiss at me. I was raised a strong Roman Catholic, but we had local harmless garter snakes at home, and I had gotten used to playing with them and using them to scare the girls. We had a problem in Oxford House with broken windows at the schools, so I told the kids I was buying some snakes to take back to Oxford House and let them loose in our schools at night. Word got around, and there were fewer broken windows after that, even though I never actually did it. Incidentally, the Hudson Bay store in Winnipeg was the only Bay store I had seen where the size of the heaters department is equal to the size of the air conditioners department. That is because Winnipeg is awfully close to the geographic center of North America and has some of the warmest summers and the coldest winters of cities in Canada. The corner of Portage, Main, and Broadway can be the coldest and the warmest and the windiest in Canada. Summer highs have reached 42 degrees centigrade, and winter's lows have reached minus 42 degrees centigrade, a difference of 84 degrees. We spent our days at the library, University of Manitoba, provincial government, the Canadian Mint, and full days at Fort Garry, Manitoba Indian Brotherhood, and a local farm. On our last day, we said goodbye and boarded the Winnipeg to Churchill train, which would arrive in Ilford about 34 hours later. From there, we had chartered a plane to fly us the last 100 kilometers directly south to Oxford House. Even the train trip was a great adventure. I had always heard about the mysterious moccasin telegraph, but here I saw it in action. The native people have their unique grapevine for the spreading of information, and relatives or friends would be at various stops to say hi to some of our students as we passed through. We reached Ilford the next day, and a few hours later were safely back in Oxford House. Home sweet home. Our last 2 weeks of June were to be an experience I never wish to repeat. On Saturday, June the 24th, 1972, a twin-engine Beechcraft 18, registration CF-IRY, owned by Ilford Riverton Airways, crashed in flames and burned between two houses located at 426 and 430 Linwood Street in St. James, Winnipeg. Shortly after takeoff from Winnipeg Airport runway 713, while climbing to a height of about 100 feet, the twin-engine airplane banked right, then stalled and crashed in flames. Despite both houses being destroyed, nobody on the ground was wounded. According to eyewitnesses, both engines were not running properly prior to the loss of control. All 9 occupants, 7 students, a nurse and pilot were killed. The 7 students from Oxford House were returning home for the summer holidays. At the time, the cause of the accident was determined to be loss of control because of engine malfunction or failure. These were the students that just the week before had visited with their brothers and sisters in the group we had brought to Winnipeg for 2 weeks. At the time, the school had one of the few telephones that could connect to the outside world. I spent about 24 hours on the phone talking to the coroner of the province of Manitoba in Winnipeg, verifying the identities of the 7 local victims. The reception was extremely poor, and each letter of a word had to be spoken phonetically. After that was completed, I was to go to the parents' homes with the local Indian chief and notify them of the death of their son or daughter. It was a very warm day, and I distinctly remember going with the chief into a small, neat cabin where an elderly woman was sitting at a table. I told her the news about her son and daughter in English, and the chief translated it into Cree. When she realized what had happened, I actually saw her face age 5 years in front of my eyes in total grief. The emotional reaction was so strong, I was in convulsions myself before I reached the door. There were still the other parents to visit and so much to be done. The plane was full of jet fuel, and the bodies had been burned beyond recognition. They were identified from dental records and the passenger log. The remains were put in sealed metal containers, which were put in wood coffins for transport to Oxford House by a Twin Otter aircraft. When they tried to load them into the plane, they found the door was not big enough, and they had to get a welder to cut a larger opening. Then they realized they could not get all 7 coffins on one Twin Otter. So we waited all night at the airstrip for the same plane to make another round trip to Winnipeg. What a night of sadness, listening for the sound of the propeller that was bringing their youth home. The local custom was to have a wake in each family's home for 3 days, when everyone could pay their respects. Meanwhile, many relatives and friends flew in from other communities. School facilities were used for accommodation and serving meals. 2 graves were dug in 2 cemeteries, but on the morning of the funeral, one was filled with water, and we had to quickly extend the one at the end of the airport landing strip into a single long trench. That day, it was extremely hot, and the church was packed. Some of the tin coffins had been opened, and the odor of burned flesh was so strong, we went through a case of air deodorant from the Hudson Bay. Then there was a challenge of getting the wood coffins to the grave, which was a mile away. We used the bay truck, the Indian Agency small tractor, and other wagons. I followed and helped balance a coffin on a small child's wagon pulled by relatives with the family walking behind. When we got to the grave, the coffins were handed down to workers who placed them in a row with the immediate family at the head of each coffin. The final ceremonies were completed. The coffins were covered with dirt, and the families went home, where everyone seemed to sleep for 2 or 3 days. After 6 days of unrelenting emotion and total grief, everyone awoke and started life anew. If you would like to read what was printed in the New York Times, follow the link in the description below. We boarded a Twin Otter in the last days of June for Winnipeg, where we picked up our car and headed for Edmonton with Gwen, Nuvik, and another new adventure. 24 years later, I was attending an Academy of Learning convention in Whistler, British Columbia in 1996, where the entertainment on the last night was Harvey Pollack, an international whistling champion. He was looking for a ride back to Vancouver and came with me. It turned out he was a lawyer from Winnipeg. And when he heard my name, he said it was familiar. I told him I had been a principal in Oxford House, and he said he was the lawyer representing Oxford House parents of the 7 children killed in an airplane accident in 1972. The hour-and-a-half drive went by in a flash as he told me the rest of the story. The cause of the accident was the fault of airport workers who put jet fuel into a piston-driven airplane. Apparently, there was enough of the regular heavier fuel in the bottom of the tank to get the plane airborne. But at that climbing angle, one motor stopped and the plane turned to the right. The pilot may have been trying to go back down on the same runway, but the other motor also stopped, and he tried to reach a golf course, but crashed 1 block short. Harvey won the case, but the value of a student's life at that time was less than $20,000. 2 years later, in June of 1998, Kathy passed away from cancer in a Drayton Valley hospice, Alberta, with Nadine at her side. She had designed her own coffin and had Richard, Nadine's husband, build a plain wood box. The burial on July 1st at the Freedom Cemetery near Edinburgh was attended by all our relatives. Kathy had planned the whole event as a celebration. We all used a black marker to trace our hand print on the plain wood coffin and then print our name inside the hand. Everyone also wrote a little note and put it in a balloon, which was then filled with helium. After some words were said in celebration of her life, we were to release our balloons as her coffin was lowered into the grave. Kathy had told her grandchildren that she was going to heaven and would be watching over them. Then the grave was to be covered with dirt, and there was Kentucky Fried Chicken and drinks for all, right next to the grave. This was followed by a packed church service in Camrose. The 4 granddaughters spoke, and the RCMP had a color guard present in recognition of her efforts to help abused women in the Camrose area. Kathy had wanted fireworks at her burial, but it was not planned for. In the end, she got her way, as every July 1st is Fireworks Day in Canada. Her immortal spirit must be smiling down on us as she waits to meet our spirits. Bye for now. Hope to see you next week.